Have you ever had that feeling, where you really want to understand something complex, not just scratch the surface, but like really get it, like uncover those surprising insights that just make everything click? Well, that's what we're all about here on the Deep Dive, and today we're going deep, deep into the world of, well, I bet you know him, Marcus Tullius Cicero.
Cicero,
You
yes.
probably remember him from, well, Roman history, the statesman, the incredible orator.
Oh, the speeches. Amazing.
But here's the thing that might surprise you. Philosophy wasn't just like a side gig for Cicero. It was a lifelong passion.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that part.
And while he's been seen for a long time as someone who just kind of recorded Greek philosophical ideas,
Oh, yeah. Cicero, the transmitter of Greek thought.
right, more and more scholars are recognizing him as like a truly original and creative thinker in his own right.
It's a fascinating shift, isn't it? That kind of historical reevaluation. For centuries, if you wanted to learn about Stoicism or Epicureanism or the academic skeptics, you'd go to Cicero's texts. But the assumption was he was just passing on the Greek wisdom.
As like a translator almost.
Exactly, like a middleman. But now we're starting to see that he wasn't just a messenger. He was actively taking those ideas and reshaping them, making them fit into a distinctly Roman way of thinking.
So for this deep dive, our mission, if you will, is to understand, first of all, what made Cicero's approach to philosophy so unique?
Mm.
And maybe more importantly for you listening right now, why it's still relevant today, all these centuries later.
A very good question.
And we'll be using the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on Cicero as our guide. It's a fantastic overview, really. It covers his life, his key ideas, his impact. We're going to unpack how he engaged with Greek philosophy, but in his own way, his commitment to skepticism, and not just skepticism as in I doubt everything, but a very specific philosophical approach.
A method, yeah.
Exactly. And then his strong belief that philosophy wasn't just for books, or scrolls in his case.
Right. Not just ivory tower stuff.
He really thought philosophy was meant to be lived, and that it could make society better.
It's interesting when you think about it. You have this towering figure in Roman history, someone deeply involved in the political and social turmoil of his time, and he turns to philosophy, but not to escape from reality.
Right.
He turns to it as a way to understand reality and maybe even improve it. That's really important, I think, to keep in mind.
Yeah, this wasn't just some hobby for him. He really thought it mattered.
Absolutely.
And one of the things we'll see is how Cicero used dialogues.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't just a literary style. It was central to how he wanted to make philosophy accessible so that everyone could think critically for themselves.
Like he was inviting everyone into the conversation.
Exactly. So to set the stage a bit, Cicero wasn't some, armchair philosopher tucked away in a quiet study somewhere. This guy was in the thick of it. Consul during the Catalan conspiracy, caught up in that whole conflict between Caesar and Pompey.
Talk about a power struggle.
Seriously.
No.
And even involved after Caesar's assassination. I mean, this is like peak Roman drama.
And danger. Let's not forget the danger.
Exactly. So how did all this real-world drama, this chaos, influence his philosophical thinking? That's something I'm really curious about.
Well, I think this raises a really important question for you, the listener, about how abstract ideas connect with real life. For Cicero, philosophy offered both personal consolation. I mean, think about what he was going through.
Yeah, I can't even
It
imagine.
must have been incredibly stressful. But it wasn't just about finding comfort. For him, philosophy also offered a potential blueprint for a better society.
So not just about personal peace of mind, but like fixing Rome's problems.
Precisely. He genuinely believed that wrestling with philosophical ideas could actually change individuals. And as a result, improve the Roman state.
It's almost like he thought that if enough people thought in the right way, then the whole society could be improved.
Exactly.
And that conviction really drives so much of his writing,
Yeah.
especially when he's talking about ethics and politics.
So it wasn't just about understanding these abstract concepts for their own sake. It was about applying them, making them relevant.
You got it. Cicero was really concerned with how these big philosophical theories played out in the practical realities of Roman life. He wasn't afraid to ask, okay, this Greek idea sounds really elegant, but will it actually work within Roman culture? Does it fit with our traditions?
It's almost like he's testing those Greek ideas against Roman reality.
That's a great way to put it. He was constantly asking, how do you reconcile philosophical ideas about, say, the gods, with centuries of Roman religious practices?
Mm.
Or how do you apply these abstract ethical rules to the, let's face it, rough and tumble of Roman society?
Mhm.
It's like he's trying to ground high philosophy in the nitty-gritty of everyday life.
Absolutely. And he wanted to bring the best of Greek thought to Rome, no question, but not just copy-paste it. He wanted Romans to think about it critically, to adapt it, and ultimately to build their own philosophical understanding.
So not just importing Greek ideas wholesale.
No, no, it was more about engaging with them, questioning them, making them their own.
And this idea of thinking critically, it leads us to his famous use of dialogues, right? Which, as you said, wasn't just a stylistic choice.
It wasn't just about being fancy. Cicero really admired Plato, who, as you know, was a master of the philosophical dialogue. He used that form as a way to actively involve his readers in the process of philosophical questioning.
Like to make them active participants.
Exactly.
But he did put his own Roman spin on it.
He did. Instead of Plato's kind of quick back and forth, Cicero often has these longer speeches that lay out different points of view.
So more in-depth arguments.
Right. And those are often followed by analysis, sometimes by Cicero himself, or by a character who kind of represents his thinking.
So for you, the learner, it's less like a fast-paced debate and more like having all the arguments laid out clearly side by side so you can really weigh them yourself.
That's a great way to visualize it.
Really see all the sides.
And this structure perfectly reflects Cicero's connection to academic skepticism. Now, when we say skepticism, I don't want you to think of it as just being negative or cynical.
Or like those people who just like to argue for the sake of arguing.
No, not at all. For Cicero and the academic skeptics, skepticism was about recognizing that human knowledge has limits. They thought absolute certainty was something we couldn't really achieve.
So always acknowledging that we could be wrong.
Right. And always being open to new information. So the best we can do is look at the plausibility of different ideas. Weigh the evidence, consider the arguments.
Okay, so skepticism as a tool for thinking critically, not just saying, I don't believe anything.
Right. It's a method, a way of approaching knowledge. And this is where we see a difference from the more dogmatic schools like the Stoics and Epicureans.
The Stoics and Epicureans, while they had their own well-thought-out ideas, they considered their core beliefs to be settled truths. Like, this is it. This is the answer.
Dogma. Yeah.
But Cicero wasn't necessarily attacking the specific ideas of Stoicism or Epicureanism, right?
No, not necessarily. What he was questioning was the very idea that any philosophical system could reach a state of, unquestionable certainty.
So it's more about the process of inquiry and less about arriving at a final answer.
Exactly. For him, the real value of philosophy was in the ongoing process of asking questions and constantly examining different ways of thinking. He really lived that idea. And even the nature and purpose of philosophy itself, those weren't off limits for this kind of scrutiny.
His philosophy all the way down.
Ha! I like that.
Now, it's interesting that Cicero, as this incredible orator, the master of persuasion, also saw communication as essential to philosophy. I mean, Plato, Socrates, he famously criticized rhetoric, seeing it as just a way to manipulate people, to persuade them without necessarily telling the truth.
Yeah.
Where did Cicero stand on this? How could he reconcile being this amazing speaker with a commitment to philosophical truth?
It's such a great point. For Cicero, who was arguably the greatest speaker of his time, this connection between philosophy and oratory was crucial.
It had to be, right? It was like his superpower.
Exactly. And he definitely condemned using speech to manipulate people, to use it for selfish reasons. But he also believed that just having pure reasoning, just logic alone, wasn't enough to bring people to philosophy.
I think there's some real wisdom there and maybe a challenge to some academics.
Right.
He's saying, look, your ideas might be great, but if you can't communicate them effectively...
They're not going to go anywhere.
Exactly. So he saw the ability to communicate effectively as essential for sharing philosophical ideas with a wider audience and for bringing people into the world of philosophical thought.
It's about making those ideas accessible, making them resonate.
So for you, the learner, rhetoric, the art of persuasion, wasn't the enemy of philosophy. It was a necessary partner.
A crucial partner. And I think Cicero was also very aware of the potential criticism that someone as involved in Roman politics as he was, someone in the thick of power struggles, would even bother with philosophy.
Like, shouldn't you be busy, running the republic?
Right. But by writing in a way that was engaging and accessible, he was trying to win over those critics.
Yeah.
and draw them into philosophical reflection even if they weren't initially inclined to go there.
Sort of saying, look, philosophy isn't just for, people in togas debating abstract ideas.
Hmm.
It's relevant to all of us.
Exactly, it's about life.
Okay, so this brings us to that first major period of his philosophical writing, around 54 to 51 BCE, when he's really getting into political philosophy. This is where we get the Republic and the Laws.
Two really key works.
And it's interesting that he started with politics, given how deeply involved he was in the Roman state at the time.
I think it's no coincidence at all. Given all the crises facing the Roman Republic,
This is a tumultuous time.
really tumultuous, writing about political philosophy would have seemed both relevant and kind of appropriate for someone in Cicero's position.
Like he's addressing the issues of the day head on.
Right. But these works were also quite new for their time. Along with his work on the Orator, the Republic and the Laws were some of the first works to bring the dialogue form into Latin literature.
So they were innovative on a stylistic level as well.
Absolutely. And while you can definitely see Plato's
As
influence,
Greek philosophical tradition.
yeah, that's there. But the Republic and the Laws are remarkably original in their focus on Roman government and institutions. That was something Plato obviously didn't have direct experience with.
So he's using Greek forms, but exploring distinctly Roman issues.
Precisely.
Let's start with the Republic. Sadly, we only have it in fragments.
Yeah, it's incomplete.
But even from what we have, what were some of the key ideas Cicero was grappling with there?
Even in its incomplete state, the Republic gives us some real insight into Cicero's early philosophical thinking. He starts by criticizing philosophers, mainly the Epicureans, who argued for withdrawing from public life.
Basically saying, thinking people should stay out of politics.
Pretty much. Now, the Stoics, with their emphasis on civic duty,
A very Roman idea. Duty.
offered a stark contrast. And you can see Cicero wrestling with this tension. On the one hand, this pull towards universalism, which was influenced by Stoic ideas about a shared human community under the cosmos. We're all part of this bigger order.
Like a cosmic citizenship?
Yeah. And then on the other hand, you have that strong Roman sense of being exceptional, of Rome being special, having a unique destiny.
Chosen by the gods.
Right. So he's asking, can these two worldviews really fit together?
Can you be both a citizen of the cosmos and a proud Roman?
That's the question. And I think it's a question that still resonates today, in different ways, of course.
It's like he's anticipating that tension between globalism and nationalism that we see even now.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing I find really interesting about the Republic is how Cicero explicitly addresses the question of why anyone, especially someone who thinks deeply, should bother with the messy business of politics at all.
He's acknowledging that it's not an obvious choice.
Right. And he even says in his preface that it's necessary to justify why people should participate in public affairs.
It's almost like he's anticipating that age-old critique of philosophers, that they're just up in their ivory towers. He's saying, no, look, getting involved matters. And he argues that while these theoretical discussions about, the best way to govern are valuable, ultimately they're useless if you can't actually convince people that getting involved in the public arena is the right thing to do.
So he's balancing theory with practice.
Yes. And he's also making the case that even having those discussions, even being a philosopher who's thinking about government, is itself a form of public service.
Interesting. So he's valuing both the active citizen and the philosopher who's reflecting on these issues.
He's trying to bridge that gap.
And you mentioned something earlier that I wanted to come back to. It's a bit of a surprising element in the Republic.
Oh, yeah.
There's this whole discussion about seeing a second sun in the sky. And it happens before they even start talking about political systems. What was the point of that? It seems a little out of place.
It does seem like a tangent, doesn't it? But it actually serves a really important purpose.
I'm intrigued. So even as Scipio, who's kind of the main speaker on political theory in the dialogue, even as he's praising abstract studies of the heavens,
Astronomy, cosmology.
yeah, all that, he's eventually convinced that dealing with earthly matters, like what's the best form of government, is actually more urgent.
More pressing.
Right. But this back and forth between the human and the divine realms, it highlights the value of both. And it also subtly questions the relationship, like how do they fit together?
I'm starting to see where you're going with this.
And then Scipio goes on to assert that there is this universal natural law
Natural law.
that's more fundamental than any human-made law.
This is a very Stoic idea.
Very Stoic.
Yeah.
And it puts the wisdom of someone who understands this natural law, a philosopher king type, above the laws of the Roman people, which is, a pretty bold claim.
It is. It makes us think about the scope of human authority versus divine authority.
Yes.
So by setting up the discussion this way, with that second son thing, Cicero's actually using the dialogue to encourage a critical examination of political philosophy itself.
He's saying, don't just take these ideas at face value. Question them. Think about their implications.
That's fascinating. And it reminds us that there's always a bigger picture.
And that sometimes focusing too narrowly on human affairs can actually limit our understanding.
Okay, so moving on to the laws. It sounds like Cicero explores this idea of a universal natural law in more detail there.
He does. The laws directly tackles the foundations of law. Cicero argues that true law, real justice, comes from what he calls natural law. And he sees this natural law as basically the same as God's law and the same as right reason.
So natural law, God's law, right reason, all the same thing.
For Cicero, yeah, pretty much. And this is what we call a normative account of law, meaning it's not just describing the laws that actually exist in different societies, it's defining what law should be. It's like a blueprint for just laws.
A gold standard.
Exactly. And the idea of nature is key here. Cicero argues that humans are, and this is a quote, born for justice.
I like that.
And what's right and wrong, it isn't just a matter of opinion or, whatever happens to be popular at the time. For Cicero, there's something inherent in our nature as rational beings that points us toward justice.
So he's saying that we're hardwired for justice.
In a way, yeah. He's emphasizing that we all belong to the same species, we all share this capacity for reason, and that creates a sense of community and a natural inclination towards fairness, towards justice. Of course, he knows that we don't always live up to this ideal because of bad habits and wrong ideas.
That's self-interest, let's be honest.
Yeah, all of that.
Oh, yeah.
But the potential for justice is there in our very nature.
It's built in. And this idea of nature extends beyond human nature, right? It goes cosmic.
It does. Cicero, drawing on Stoic ideas about the cosmos, sees the universe as being governed by God. And this governance happens through the very same right reason that we humans possess.
So our reason is like a reflection of the divine reason that governs the universe.
That's how he sees it.
Wow.
So when we act in accordance with our own reason, we're aligning ourselves with that divine order of things, which is a powerful idea, I think.
It is powerful. It makes you think about the consequences of our actions in a different way.
Absolutely.
And this leads to his argument that justice, true justice, has to be based on this universal natural law, not just on whatever agreements people happen to make amongst themselves.
And this is where he criticizes the Epicurean view of justice.
Right. For the Epicureans, justice is basically a social contract. It's about maximizing our own well-being.
Right, it's a kind of pragmatic view of justice. But Cicero wants something more solid, something grounded in a higher principle.
So he's making a case for a kind of objective morality.
He is. And that's a controversial idea even today.
Now, there's something rather unusual that Cicero does in the laws, and I'm curious to hear your take on it.
Oh, I'm sure there are many unusual things about the laws. What's caught your attention?
He seems to silence dissenting voices, especially Atticus, who represents the Epicureans and the skeptical New Academy.
Oh, yes.
Which is odd because this is supposed to be a dialogue, a format that encourages open inquiry. So why would he do that?
That's a really insightful question. And it's something scholars still debate. He doesn't even really explicitly argue against the Epicurean theory of justice. He kind of just dismisses the Epicureans as not being that interested in government or knowledgeable about it. And he flat out asks the skeptical academy to be silent so they don't, and this is a quote, cause confusion and upset my elegantly arranged edifice.
Which, given that Cicero himself was a follower of the skeptical academy,
Makes it all the more strange, right?
it almost seems to go against his whole belief in skepticism and open debate.
It's a puzzle. One way to understand it, and this is just one interpretation, is that maybe Cicero is trying to highlight the tension between this universal ideal of natural law, this idea of a single unified standard of justice that applies to everyone, and the reality that people have very different and often conflicting opinions about what's just.
So it's almost like he's saying, look, even though I'm presenting this idea of natural law as universal, I'm aware that it's just one perspective.
And maybe by seemingly suppressing those other viewpoints, he's actually making the reader more aware of their absence.
And making us wonder, why are those voices missing?
Exactly. He's prompting us to think about why it might be necessary or even problematic to try to aim for this kind of uniformity in thinking about justice.
That's a really nuanced reading. So even in seemingly shutting down debate, he's actually sparking it in the reader's mind.
That's Cicero for you, always pushing us to think deeper.
So after this initial period focused on political philosophy, the Republic and the laws. Cicero embarks on this massive project later in his life, a real encyclopedia of philosophy.
An ambitious undertaking.
What motivated this huge outpouring of philosophical writing?
Well, the last few years of Cicero's life were marked by, well, Roman history, huge political upheaval,
Understatement.
the dictatorship, and then the assassination of Julius Caesar, followed by this brief period of hope for a restored republic.
Which then gets dashed.
Yeah, exactly. And on a personal level, he was dealing with the death of his daughter, Tullia,
A devastating loss.
a terrible tragedy. So it was in this context of both public and private turmoil that he started this incredibly ambitious project to create a comprehensive overview of the entire field of philosophy.
Like he was trying to find some order and meaning amidst all the chaos.
I think that's a very plausible interpretation.
What were some of the main areas he covered in this encyclopedia of philosophy?
Oh, he covers a lot of ground. Practical ethics and on duties, the theory of emotions and the Tusculan disputations, Stoic ideas on fate and on divination. He also wrote about more specific ethical topics and on old age and on friendship. Really interesting stuff.
A real philosophical smorgasbord.
You could say that. But for our purposes, I think it's especially useful to focus on his works on epistemology, ethical theory, and theology from this period.
Because they really show his skeptical approach in action.
Yes, he's putting that skepticism to work, applying it to some of the biggest questions in philosophy.
Let's start with epistemology then. His work on academic skepticism, even though parts of it are lost, seems really central to this.
It is. Even though it's incomplete, on academic skepticism is really important because it lays out the epistemological viewpoint of the skeptical academy, which is basically the philosophical justification for the very method Cicero uses in so much of his writing. But true to form, he doesn't just present the skeptical viewpoint uncritically.
Because that would be dogmatic.
Haha. Right. He includes this really interesting and thorough critique of skepticism, especially in the part known as the Lucullus.
So it's like a debate within the text itself about whether skepticism is even a valid approach.
Exactly.
What are some of the main arguments that Lucullus brings up against skepticism?
Well, Lucullus argues that if we can't be certain about anything, then trying to find proof becomes kind of pointless, right?
Because how can you prove something if you can't even be sure of the proof itself?
Exactly. It's a kind of infinite regress. He also attacks the skeptic's denial of what the Stoics called cataleptic impressions.
Those super clear and vivid impressions that the Stoics thought, were like a direct grasp of truth.
Yeah, Lucullus is saying, look, if you experience something so clearly and vividly, how can you deny that it's true? And he also points out that even the statement, nothing can be known for sure, that itself seems to contradict the whole skeptical position. Because if it's true, then you must know it for sure.
So how does Cicero, speaking as the skeptic, respond to these challenges? Because they're not trivial challenges.
He doesn't shy away from them. Cicero, or rather, the character representing the skeptical viewpoint, draws on the ideas of Clitomachus.
Another important skeptical philosopher.
Yes. Clitomachus made this distinction between fully agreeing with something, really believing it, and just finding it plausible. Like, okay, this seems reasonable. And according to Clitomachus, the wise skeptic never fully agrees with any impression. But they can still act on those impressions that seem plausible, even without that full certainty.
Okay, so I can see how that's different from dogmatism.
It is.
But how does that work in practice?
Cicero gives a simple example, which I really like. He says, imagine you see a glass of water. It looks clean. It smells fine. You might think it's safe to drink.
And you probably would drink it.
Right. You would act on that impression, but you wouldn't necessarily be absolutely certain that it's safe.
There's always a chance you could be wrong. Maybe it's contaminated somehow.
And if it turns out to be bad water, well, that doesn't mean your initial impression was wrong. It just means you took it to be plausible, not definitively true.
So it's about acting on the best information we have without claiming to know everything, for sure.
Exactly. And Cicero even suggests that even the Stoic sage, that idealized figure who supposedly can achieve certainty through those cataleptic impressions, even the Stoic sage would still rely on plausibility in many everyday situations.
Just to get by.
Right, to navigate the world. And then Cicero brings in Carneades, who, as you know, was a really influential skeptical philosopher.
One of the big names.
Yeah. Carneades adds this important refinement to the idea of plausibility. He says that the impression must not only seem plausible, but it must also be unimpeded, meaning there's no evidence or information that contradicts it.
So back to our water example. If you saw the glass of water and it looked fine, but then you heard a news report about, contamination in the water supply,
That would be an impediment.
that would give you a reason to doubt.
Right. It would change your assessment of the plausibility of the water being safe.
This is making a lot of sense. So instead of truth being the foundation for what seems likely, maybe what seems most likely, especially when there's no reason to doubt it, can be a kind of practical guide, even if we don't have absolute proof.
That's exactly the direction that Carneades and Cicero are exploring. They're suggesting that we can build a kind of working idea of truth based on what seems most likely and what isn't contradicted by anything else we know.
Unimpeded, to use their term.
Right, and this allows the skeptic to talk about identifying some things as true and others as false, but not in that stoic sense of having absolute certainty. It's more about making the most reasonable judgment based on all the available information. And Cicero is very careful to point out that even skepticism itself has to be subjected to the same kind of critical examination that it applies to everything else. No special treatment for skepticism.
I like that. So it's a method, not a dogma. It's a way of thinking, a way of approaching the world.
Exactly. And, it's fascinating how Cicero connects this abstract theory of knowledge to real-world decisions he had to make, especially when he was dealing with the Catiline conspiracy.
That whole episode where he basically had to act like a detective, uncover this plot to overthrow the government.
Yeah, really high stakes.
High stakes. And Lucullus, when he's criticizing skepticism, he actually brings this up.
He does.
He says to Cicero, very pointedly, you're the one who brought those hidden matters to light by exposing the conspiracy, but you're also supporting a philosophy that supposedly keeps things in the dark.
It's irony at its best.
It is. So this highlights a really important question. Does skepticism actually provide a good enough basis for making these huge decisions, especially in politics where, people's lives can be at stake?
This was a life or death situation.
It was. And Cicero's decision to execute some of the alleged conspirators without a full trial, that was controversial then, and it's still debated by historians today.
Rightfully so. It was a very bold move.
And it really makes you think. Was mere plausibility enough to justify such a drastic action?
Shouldn't he have had absolute certainty before taking such a step?
Cicero doesn't give us easy answers, but he makes it very clear why these questions about how we know things, these epistemological questions, they have profound real-world implications.
They do. They're not just abstract puzzles.
Okay. Moving on to ethical theory. Cicero's work on ends seems to be another great example of him using this skeptical method, this approach of presenting different viewpoints and really examining them.
Oh, absolutely. And even the title itself, On Ends.
Referring to the highest good, what is the ultimate goal of life? What should we be aiming for?
Yeah. It sets the stage for a debate.
It does.
Because what is the highest good? That's the question.
Right. Is it pleasure? Is it virtue? Is it something else? And in On Ends, Cicero examines three of the leading ethical theories of his time: Epicureanism, Stoicism, and the ethics of the old academy.
Three big contenders.
And as we've come to expect, he presents each theory through someone who supports it, and then he offers his own critical response, really taking them apart and looking at their strengths and weaknesses.
We're going to get to the bottom of things.
So let's talk about his engagement with Epicureanism first. Now, we all know the Epicureans believed that pleasure was the highest good, but Cicero starts his critique by talking about Torquatus's ancestors.
Oh, interesting.
These were like Roman heroes, really strict, known for their dedication to public service, to duty, to all those Roman virtues, and they often made really difficult decisions, for the good of the Republic. What was Cicero's point in bringing them up?
He's using these examples of Roman virtue to challenge the Epicurean focus on pleasure.
He's basically saying, look, can you really explain the actions of these respected figures if they were just trying to maximize their own pleasure?
Right. These guys were making sacrifices, sometimes huge sacrifices, and Cicero's implying that those sacrifices can only be explained if they were prioritizing something higher than their own personal pleasure, or even the pleasure of their families.
Which goes directly against Epicurean principles.
It does. And by bringing up these core Roman values, these almost sacred examples of Roman virtue, Cicero's putting a lot of pressure on the Epicurean viewpoint.